Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Way of the Psychonaut with Dr. Stan Grof. We begin today with Module 1, titled The History of Psychonautics, Ancient, Aboriginal, and Modern Technologies of the Sacred. I'm your host, Sherry, at the Shift Network. We are ready to get started, and before we begin, I'd like to share a few important details to help you take full advantage of the course and to bring some ease to the technology. There are 3 general course details we'd like you to take care of right away. The first is to confirm your email address with us to make sure you receive all course-related emails. And the link to do that is in the course orientation email you should have received the day you registered. You'll be receiving 2 emails each week, one prior to the session containing access details and updates, and then another email following that contains the deepening practices that Stan has created to help support you in the integration of your course materials. The second item for you to take care of is to locate and bookmark your course homepage. The course homepage is your treasure box for the course. You'll find all of the course information there, including access links, recordings, handouts, transcripts, all in one convenient place. And even the slides that Stan will be sharing today have already been uploaded to the course homepage. You'll find the link for the course homepage in any one of the emails you've received since joining the course. The third item is an invitation for you to join the course community group Facebook page. So this is to connect with fellow students in the course and to share your insights. So to join that group, go to your course homepage and click on the button in the upper left corner that says Course Community Group. For today's and for all of our sessions together, some quick tips. If the session should freeze up on you or if you get disconnected, we recommend that you quit all other programs that may be running and if necessary, shut down and restart. If your internet service is intermittent, you do have the option to join us by telephone, and the access details to do that are also located on your course homepage in the upper right corner. If you have any technical questions during the session, please use the Q&A button to submit your question, and I will do my best to respond as quickly as possible. And you can always, at any time throughout the course, reach out to our very friendly customer support team by visiting support.theshiftnetwork.com. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your patience with all of the technical details. And now, on behalf of everyone at the Shift Network, we are very honored to offer this advanced course with Dr. Grof. Stanislav Grof has over 50 years of experience in researching non-ordinary states of consciousness and experiential psychotherapy. He's one of the founders of transpersonal psychology and the founding president of the International Transpersonal Association. Stan currently teaches at the Department of Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies and through Grof Transpersonal Training. And now, let's begin our journey with Dr. Stan Grof. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I would like to welcome you all to this opening module of an advanced telecourse called The Way of the Psychonaut. This advanced course is a reaction to great interest which the viewers showed to the preceding 7-week telecourse, which was called The Psychology of the Future. So this will be an advanced version where I would like to give a comprehensive information about non-ordinary states of consciousness with special emphasis on how to use them for self-exploration, for healing, for spiritual and philosophical quest. So we'll cover a number of topics. We'll look at the history of psychonautics. We will explore the vastly expanded cartography of the psyche, which is absolutely necessary for any kind of navigation through the inner space. We'll talk about the self-healing potential of the psyche. We will talk about synchronicity, extremely important phenomenon whenever we work with non-ordinary state. We'll talk about the kind of spiritual experiences that come in non-ordinary states. And in that context, we'll discuss the difference between spirituality, mysticism, and religion. Another interesting topic is what Willis Harman called higher creativity, how we can use non-ordinary states of consciousness to get scientific or artistic inspiration. We will also talk about the healing, the transformative power of non-ordinary states. And we take visual journeys through the deep domains of the psyche that are currently unrecognized, not accepted by mainstream academicians and clinicians. So this will be a very, very rich journey that we take together, and I'm really looking forward to it. I would like to, before I start talking, I would like to thank the Shift Network and the team that made it possible to broadcast the telecourse that already happened, and also organized and did a lot of work on this advanced telecourse. So I'd like to thank for all the enthusiasm, the energy, the time, the love that they showed in making this available to all of you. Now, I would like to first clarify two terms that I will be using all through the telecourse, and that is holotropic and psychonautics. I have so far talked about non-ordinary states of consciousness, but I have been interested all these 60 years in a particular important large subgroup of these non-ordinary states, which have very special properties. The common denominator of these states is that they have a healing potential, they have a transformative potential, they have an evolutionary potential, and also what we call heuristic potential, that's H-E-U-R. That means if you are experiencing these states, if you are working with these states, you will make many, many discoveries that are paradigm breaking, that bring absolutely new insights about consciousness, about the psyche, and even about the nature of reality. And I was astounded when I found out that psychiatry, psychology does not have any special name for these states. We use that global term altered states of consciousness, which I really don't like, because it suggests that in these states our perception of ourselves and the world is somehow distorted, is altered. And that certainly has not been my experience, and certainly not the experience of mystics, that when they are in this non-ordinary state, that their perception is distorted. Actually the opposite. They have the feeling, or we have the feeling, that we are now getting information about ourselves and the cosmos that was missing before for a more profound understanding who we are and what it is all about. So when I didn't find any name for these states in psychiatry, psychology, I decided to coin a term myself, because I believe that it's really important that we have that term. And I coined the term holotropic, which is a Greek composite word. It's a what we call neologism. In other words, it didn't exist before in the Greek language. Holos means whole, and trepein means moving towards something, or being oriented towards something. Like in the term heliotropic. Helios is the sun, And heliotropism is the property of the flower, the plant, to always orient itself to the sun, always move in the direction of the sun. So literally this means moving toward wholeness, and the meaning of this term is that we don't actually use our full perceptual and experiential potential when we are in the ordinary state of consciousness. That we have a much vaster perceptual capacity, and in these non-ordinary states, in these holotropic states, we can actually experience anything that's part of the universe, from ourselves all the way to the experience of the creative principle itself. What's called, for example, in Hinduism, Atman, Brahman. So I will use that term holotropic for this special category of non-ordinary states, which have the healing, the transformative, evolutionary, and heuristic potential. Now, I would like to also define how I would be using the term psychonautics. Psychonautics for me means systematic and responsible use of these holotropic states of consciousness for healing, for self-exploration, for ritual activity, for inspiration, for spiritual and philosophical quest, and so on. Now, this responds to a very powerful tendency that we all have, the need to have a transcendental experience. Andrew Weil, whom you probably know, wrote a book quite a few years ago called The Natural Mind, and in it he expressed his opinion, which I certainly agree with, that the need for transcendence, for a mystical experience, is the most powerful drive in the human psyche, much more powerful than sex, which was so much emphasized by Freud. So this psychonautic activity actually is a pursuit of this deep craving that we all have for transcendence, for a mystical experience. So if you look at the history of psychonautics, it goes really way back to the dawn of history, to really tens of thousands of years, and it's closely connected with shamanism. The induction of holotropic states and working with holotropic states is an essential characteristic of shamanism. Shamanism is the oldest healing art and also spiritual system that we find in history. It goes back at least 40,000 years to the Cro-Magnon people, and partially even to the Neanderthal. So I would like to show a few pictures now. We find beautiful carvings and paintings on the walls of the caves in France, in Germany, which portray animals, mostly animals which existed at the time of the Cro-Magnon, and those were animals that they were hunting, like the mammoth, the bison, the ibexes, the wolves, and so on. But there are also images of figures which are not animal, which combine in a strange way animal and human characteristics. And the experts, the scholars who were looking at it, they identify them as images of ancient shamans. So the most famous is the sorcerer of Les Trois Frères. Les Trois Frères is a cave which was discovered by three brothers. This is the name comes from, and this is by far the most famous image of a kind of ancient shaman. It's a composite image. It has antlers of a stag. It has eyes of an owl. It has the beard that is human. It has paws that have been identified as the lion's paws. Then the tail, which is a horse tail, and then legs, which are human legs. So that's the sorcerer of from Les Trois Frères. There are also some important images in another cave, which is called Lascaux. And this one is has been referred to as the Beastmaster. He actually appears in the middle of an enormous number of animals, kind of like overlooking the happy hunting grounds. And he again is a composite image, has human features and animal features. Then we have another very interesting picture, which is also on the wall from Lascaux. It has been described as a hunting accident. It shows the rhino at the left, and then it shows the wounded bison and a lying figure, which was seen as a wounded or actually maybe dead person. Until somebody noticed that this figure has an erect penis, which certainly is not characteristic for wounded people or dead people, but it's a very well-known physiological manifestation of a shamanic trance. So we're now seen more as a hunting magic, a shaman in the trance, sort of trying to influence the hunt, make it successful. And we have one more figure here, which is from a cave called La Gabilou. And this has been referred to as dancer. Again, a combination of human and animal characteristic. The other interesting thing is in a cave which is called Truc d'Adoubert, where there is an effigy with two bisons, and then around it are footprints arranged in such a way that it suggests that they were conducting actually trance dances of the kind that we still find today in pre-industrial cultures. So those are all signs that there was shamanism already 30, 40,000 years ago. And there's some even older evidence which I refer to, and those are the cave bear sanctuaries of the Neanderthals, which are in Engadin in Switzerland, and also in southern Germany. So shamanism is extremely old, as I mentioned. It's also universal. You can find it in North America, in Central America, in South America. You can find it in Siberia. You can find it in Europe, in Lapland. We can find it in Polynesia, the kahunas and so on. So it's a universal and extremely old phenomenon. And the center of the shamanic activity is always some procedure that induces holotropic states. Now, the career of most shamans begins with a spontaneous visionary state, which has quite specific characteristics which are common for many shamanic cultures. It involves a visionary journey into the underworld. in which the novice shaman experiences attacks of evil spirits. Is put through some very painful ordeal, emotionally and physically painful, and it culminates in an experience of death, of annihilation, dismemberment, and then experience of psychospiritual rebirth, in which this novice shaman has the experience of getting a new body, new flesh, new blood, new eyes, and then goes into a kind of magical flight into the supernal realms, into the solar realm very frequently. So it can experience a transformation into a solar bird, which could be an eagle, could be a falcon, could be a condor, a thunderbird, or can have the experience that he or she is carried actually by a solar bird to the solar realm. This journey to the supernal realm can also take some other sort of archetypal forms. For example, climbing on a world tree, or climbing on a rainbow, or on a pole with a certain number of notches, or a bridge made of bows and arrows. Now, what is very important about the shamanic journey, the magical journey, that the shaman, typically the novice shaman, heals himself or herself from various psychosomatic diseases, but sometimes even physical diseases. So the anthropologists refer to shamans as wounded healers. Not only do they heal themselves, but they learn how to heal. And the primary healing is energetic healing. The shamans also might have knowledge of some naturalistic remedies, herbs and so on. But the essence of it is working with energies. We're just barely beginning to discover this energy medicine. It's on the verge of accepting acupuncture, for example, but quite far from discovering or accepting homeopathy. But the work with non-ordinary states definitely is energetic work. And we find something similar in Chinese, in Japanese medicine, when they talk about qi, the vital energy. And when the energy is blocked, that's conducive to disease, and the opening of the flow of the vital energy is ideal for prevention of diseases or for healing. So the shamans experience something like a crash course in healing. Not only do they heal themselves, but they get the insights how they should work with other people. And they also have the feeling of connecting with forces of nature, connecting with animals, both really existing animals, or we would say archetypal animals, which they call power animals or animal spirits, which they then use when they start working with clients. So this is one aspect of shamanism that involves holotropic state, this initiatory crisis, which can be spontaneous. It could be also induced by a teacher shaman using psychedelics or some other methods. Now, the other aspect of shamanism that involves holotropic states is the healing. And the shaman, after having this revealing experience and grounding it, then starts using holotropic states working with clients. So in shamanic healing, it's always either the shaman going into a holotropic state or inducing a holotropic state in his or her clients, or both the shaman and the client are in a holotropic state. So it's really essential for shamanism. Now the second area where we find holotropic states are the so-called rites of passage. The term rite of passage was coined by Dutch anthropologist Arnold van Gennep, and that's spelled G-E-N-N-E-P, who studied a number of native cultures, and he found out that practically all of them, in some other cultures, some other studies found that at least 90% of them use holotropic states of consciousness for these rituals. So in rite of passage, again, the native cultures use some consciousness expanding methods, very much the way shamans are using it. These rites of passage are conducted at the time of some important biological or social transitions. So for example, when a child is born, circumcision, extremely important rites of passage are the puberty rites, then marriage, menopause, and dying. Those are important occasions for conducting a rite of passage. And besides that, there could be events like initiation of warriors or moving into another territory. Now, if we study these rites of passage, we'll find out that they always involve a powerful experience of psychospiritual death and rebirth, very similar to what I described for the shamanic journey. So the group of people who are to be initiated is usually separated from the tribe, and they are put through some very powerful, again, mind consciousness expanding procedure, and it involves a powerful experience of dying and being reborn. They also sometimes use certain external props that are drawn from biological birth. For example, they would shave the head of the initiate to approximate it to the head of the newborn. They might smear blood over the shaven head, sometimes even feces. They might wrap the initiate into a rawhide, or they might bury them temporarily up to their chin in the ground, and so on. Now, these kinds of experiences involve a very convincing experience of dying. A significant part of us died, and a very important new part was born. And in these rites, this then frequently interpreted as dying in the old role and being born into the new one. This is most obvious in the rites of passage, where the idea is that the individuals going into the rite of passage are boys and girls, and they go through very convincing experience of dying and being born, and this is then interpreted as being born now as men and women with all the rights and all the duties of adult people. So once they had been through the rite of passage, nobody in the tribe would dare to treat them as children. They are adults for all practical purposes. Quite different from the industrial civilization, where we miss meaningful rites of passage, and we have a situation where we can be 50 years old and we come home and our parents still treat us as children, as they think that they could make decisions for us, that, intervene in our life and so on. If you study actually what happens, significant part of the experience of psychospiritual death rebirth is a conscious completion of the emotional entanglement with the mother, with the maternal organism. We spent 9 months plus minus in the womb in total dependency on our mothers. Then we are taken for this wild ride through the birth canal, really overwhelmed, and then emerging helpless, totally dependent on the mother emotionally and biologically. So a significant part of the psychospiritual death rebirth is a full conscious completion and integration of the emotions and the pent-up physical energies from the birth process. So it really terminates the kind of a deep emotional entanglement which we normally have with the mother's organism. So I would like to illustrate now the importance that these kinds of rituals have for native, for pre-industrial cultures by showing you images from a very important ceremony of the Mandan Indians who live on the plains, the Great Plains of United States. And this complex ceremony is called Okipa. So Okipa ceremony of the Mandan Indians. So what we see on this picture is a very complex scene that involves quite a few components. One of it is celebration of the first people going back to the original flood. That's part of their mythology. It also is ritual activity that supports the success of the hunt. So you can see the buffalo dance happening. So it's a very complex scene on the outside. And then while this is happening, there is an initiation of warriors, or initiation into the warrior status, which is happening in a kiva, in a ceremonial building. And there these boys stayed for 5 nights. They have no water. They have to fast. They don't get any food during this time. And an elder, sort of shaman, would discuss with them the mythology of the tribe, and everything that they need to know to fully connect with the rest of the tribe. And then begins the actual transformation process. Now, what's happening here? They get skewers going through their pectoral muscles, which are on ropes. The ropes are pulled up, so they're suspended on these skewers. And then there are more skewers going through the buttocks, and their heavy buffalo skulls are hanging on those skewers. And then the ropes are rotated until they get torn off these skewers. And then they are taken outside. We see on the next picture. Where those who still have the buffalo skulls, they have to run in the circle until they lose the skulls from the skewers. And if they faint before then, if they don't achieve that, then other people take them and they drag them until the buffalo skulls fall off. And then after this procedure, they're taken into a tent and they are treated very, very lovingly, very gently. They are treated as children, getting a lot of loving support, being fed milk and so on. Now, this is something that we find in many native cultures, that these rites of passage can involve very, very painful procedures, like the sub-incision in the Australian Aborigines, for example, or massive bloodletting in the Lacandon Maya people. So they really attribute tremendous importance to these rituals. There were studies by Victor Turner, an American anthropologist, who found out that when people do these rituals together, that they develop a sense of bonding, a sense of community, which is very important for our current situation. Because if you read about modernity, the industrial civilization, The word that you would probably find most frequently is alienation, that we are in a situation where we are alienated from our bodies, we are alienated from each other, we are alienated from nature, we are alienated from the cosmos and from the spiritual dimension, from the divine, if you want. And so the sharing of these states is a tremendously effective remedy for alienation, because it creates that sense of bonding. We see this, typically when we do large groups of holotropic breathwork, and people, even within one weekend, they can develop sense of community and bonding, and certainly develop it when they do the training, when they share these kinds of states with each other repeatedly. So those are two very important forms of working with holotropic states. They both involve something that the Polish researcher Kazimierz Dabrowski called positive disintegration. Experience where you experience sort of disorder and chaos and so on, and ultimately it results in a higher form of order. We have a similar kind of concept now in modern science. Ilya Prigozhin talks about order by chaos, or order coming out of chaos. There's a term, catharsis, which comes from Aristotle, who was himself an initiate in the death rebirth mysteries. And he described that the chaos, which is then created by frantic dancing and loud music, and even wines that very likely were laced with psychedelic substances, that disorder, chaos, that ultimately leads to catharsis, to purging, to cleansing, and to higher order. So we have these two types of positive disintegration, the initiatory journey of the shaman, and then the experiences of initiates in rites of passage. Now, the culture that had both shamanism and rites of passage, they consider the shamanic initiation to be by far superior to the kind of transformation that we experience in rites of passage. And the reason for this is that the rites of passage are human-made, and it's more or less mandatory for people to go through it, whereas the shamanic initiation is something that reflects a higher choice. The shaman is elected somehow to become special, to become a healer, to become a priest, and so on. So of those two, the shamanic initiation is considered to be of a higher order, to be superior. Then we have another important group of non-ordinary states that were induced in what was called the mysteries of death and rebirth. Now, these mysteries of death and rebirth were based on very powerful mythologies that were showing gods, demigods, legendary heroes, sometimes ordinary people, going through what Joseph Campbell called hero's journey, going through an experience of death and rebirth. Those were very common, for example, in the Mediterranean area. The oldest one was the story of Inanna, the goddess Inanna, descending into the underworld, ruled by her sister Ereshkigal, and to find elixir of life. She wanted to bring back to life her dead lover, Dumuzi. In Egypt, we have the story of Isis and Osiris. Osiris being killed and dismembered by his brother, and the two sisters, Isis and Nephthys, bringing the pieces together, reviving him, and he then became the ruler of the underworld. there is a story about dismemberment of Dionysus and Pallas Athene healing him and bringing him together. There are similar stories of Attis, Adonis. There's also the famous story of the abduction of the goddess Persephone into the underworld by Hades, and then Hades being forced by Zeus and the other gods to return her for part of the year to the world, because her mother Demeter refused to grow plants and vegetation unless that happens. There is a story about Mithra. There's a story about Wotan hanging on the Yggdrasil, the tree, the ash tree, the world tree, and trading his eyes for the knowledge of the sacred runes. There are also powerful stories in pre-Hispanic America. There's a story of the god Quetzalcoatl, plumed serpent, who was given intoxicating beverage, pulque, by the goddess of pulque. And when he was drunk, he committed incest with his sister. And then when he sobered up, he decided to punish himself by immolating himself. So he created a funeral pyre and burned himself and traveled through the four realms of the underworld, and then emerged transformed into the planet Venus. There's also a story that we can read in the Mayan tradition, in the Popol Vuh, the story of twins, Hunhunahpu and Xbalanque, who were invited by the gods of the underworld to play ball with them. And they were sacrificed, but they experienced a rebirth, and they turned into celestial bodies. So there are these very, very powerful death rebirth stories existing in many, many different cultures at many different times. And in many of these places that had these powerful death rebirth mythologies, they actually created institutions, mysteries, where the initiates would come and they would be given some consciousness expanding substance, or they would be doing things that can change consciousness, and they experience powerful death rebirth, which was then interpreted as union, as identification with the deity of that particular culture. So there were mysteries of Inanna and Dumuzi in ancient Sumer. There were mysteries of Isis and Osiris in Egypt. There were the Bacchanalia, the Dionysian rites, where the initiates would drink wine. Again, from what we know, with some powerful psychedelic additions. They would take off their clothes, they would run in the countryside, they would catch animals and eat raw meat, and then having a sort of group sexual orgy. And then when the instinctual powers were exhausted, they would experience a spiritual opening, an experience of reunion with Dionysus. Now these mysteries were extremely important, particularly in the Mediterranean area, in Greece, in Rome, in Asia Minor. And the list of the initiates in these mysteries reads like who is who in antiquity. So among the initiates, for example, are the philosophers Aristotle, Plato, and Epictetus, the military leader Alcibiades, the playwrights Euripides, Sophocles, the poet Pindaros, also the emperor Marcus Aurelius, whom you will know from the movie Gladiator. He was an initiate, and then Marcus Aurelius, and then also Cicero. Cicero actually wrote something about these mysteries, which I would like to read you. It's in his book called Laws, or De Legibus, and here he says, among the many excellent and indeed divine institutions which your Athens has brought forth and contributed to human life, none, in my opinion, is better than those mysteries. For by their means we have been brought out of our barbarous and savage mode of life and educated and refined to a state of civilization. And as the rites are called initiations, so in very truth we have learned from them the beginnings of life and have gained the power not only to live happily, but also to die with a better hope. Now, what is important in all these mysteries of death and rebirth is that people not only complete somehow consciously birth, as I was already mentioning, but they experience in a very convincing way death, and they realize that they are still alive. So this is a powerful experience that takes away the fear of death. And when we can free ourselves from fear of death, it has tremendous impact on our life, how we live our life, our hierarchy of values, our strategy of life. So this can be called dying before dying. An Augustinian monk in Germany of the 17th century who said about this dying before dying, the man who dies before he dies does not die when he dies. And so when we started working with psychedelics and then, later with the holotropic breathwork, we realized that we were witnessing the process that was the essence of these ancient institutions, from shamanism through rite of passage to the mysteries of death and rebirth. So I would like to say a little more about the mysteries and eleusis, or eleusis, as modern Greeks say. And these were mysteries which were conducted in Eleusis, which is a place about 16 miles from Athens, for a period of almost 2,000 years. And even after these 2,000 years, they didn't end because people lost interest in them, but this was an interdiction of a Roman Christian emperor, Theodosius, who stopped all cults that he considered to be pagan. So this was a situation where for every 5 years, for 2,000 years, were these great mysteries in Eleusis, and every year were the smaller mysteries. Now the question was, what were they offering here? That was so impressive that it kept the attention and interest of people for almost 2,000 years. So there were some theories that maybe this was sophisticated theater, some special effects, because people were talking about visions of light, and then, images of deities appearing. Now the people who were very impressed with, the people who created the Greek theater, so they would not be easily impressed by some kind of theatrical effects. And also there were records in the sanctuary, and there was no item, showing anything paid for actors or for props and so on. There's also the Telestrion, which I will show you a little later, the gigantic hall in which these mysteries were happening, had big pillars all around, and in the middle actually was a sanctuary. So this was not a great place for theater. I mean, the Greeks knew how to create amphitheaters when they wanted to have place for theater with good acoustics. Like everybody who has seen Epidaurus knows that. So this was not theater with special effects. So the question is, what was it? There were three people, Albert Hofmann, the discoverer of LSD, Gordon Wasson, who was the New York banker and amateur mycologist who brought the psilocybin mushrooms from Mexico to Paris to be identified, and then gave samples to Albert Hofmann, who extracted psilocybin and psilocin from these mushrooms. And then third person, Karl Rack, who's a Greek scholar, they spent years, going really deeply into the evidence about the Eleusinian mysteries, and they came to the conclusion that the key to these mysteries was a sacred beverage, which was called Kykeon, Kykeon, that was administered to these initiates in a certain critical time of the ritual. And they found that this very likely was a beverage which was an extract of ergot, very similar to LSD. So we are dealing with a mystery religion which was using a psychedelic sacrament that kept the attention of the ancient world for almost 2,000 years. So I would like to show you some pictures now, which are related to this sanctuary in Elefsis. I mentioned the Telestrion, this gigantic hall where these mysteries were conducted. So those are the ruins. When you go there today, this is what you find. This is the reconstruction of this sanctuary. And an interesting question is, how many people were involved in this? So when we were in Elefsis, we had a guide, and I was very curious. So I asked, how many people were participating in these mysteries? And the guide said, at its height, about 3,000 people. Now, if you imagine that in a relatively small world, 3,000 people, in 5-year intervals would have powerful psychedelic experiences, it would have to have some powerful impact on the culture. So I got a whole other perspective of ancient Greece. We consider it the cradle of the Euro-American civilization. The Greeks were very interesting, very talented people. They had all kinds of interesting ideas, philosophy, and great art, and so on. Well, it puts a little different perspective if we imagine that thousands of people had psychedelic experiences. So when I think about Plato today, where his philosophy came from, the concept of archetypes and so on, I don't see him pacing in the academy and saying, well, let me see how the world works. So we don't have just this level, we have this other level that cannot normally be experienced, and there are these ideas and forms with capital letters, or archetypes, if you want to call it that way, and they form and inform what is happening on this level. Well, we know now that it is possible to have a powerful experience of archetypes, of the archetypal figures, deities, demonic entities, the abodes of the beyond, the paradises, the heavens, the hells, and so on. As I see it now, for philosophers like Plato or Pythagoras, those were experiences that they had. They experienced this archetypal dimension. This was not philosophical speculation. When you go to Eleusis, this is the cave that has the reputation of being the cave where Hades disappeared after kidnapping Persephone. And then I have several pictures here. This is Hades and Persephone. And as you can see, there is a vegetation there. This was also related to the vegetable cycle. If you imagine a seed being taken and put underground, the seed dies and then is reborn in the new flower, in the new vegetable or whatever we are growing. So this psychospiritual death rebirth of the initiates was closely linked to the vegetable cycle, the death and rebirth of the seed. This is why, again, at the height of the ceremony, they were showing the ores. This is Demeter and Persephone, and the little boy is Triptolemus, who it's a kind of a figure of puer aeternus in the Jungian terminology. And then I have also one of the pictures describing the scene of what was happening in these mysteries. So we have now been through several of those situations where these holotropic states played a very important role. We had the shamanism, the initiatory experience of the shaman, the healing procedure that the shamans do, inducing holotropic states in themselves or in their clients. We have the rites of passage, again, a death rebirth experience. And then many native cultures, a great majority of native cultures have these procedures, either rites of passage or some similar healing ceremonies and so on, or situations where they were divinating, they were trying to get some extrasensory information about people, about lost objects, and so on. So they're using these procedures in many different ways. And then we have the history of the ancient cultures, the Mayans, the Incas, and so on. They had their own very powerful rituals, all involving consciousness expanding substances. So I will now take us through actually a sort of pictorial journey. Going through the different consciousness expanding methods. So this is a very famous cactus, Mexican cactus, Lophophora williamsi, known as peyote. Very important for the Mayans, for the Aztecs, and then a sacrament of the Native American church. Now we have indications that there was use of peyote already in the ancient Mayan culture. So we have here a jar that is showing administration of peyote through enema. I think I have some details from that. This was the discovery and interpretation of an anthropologist, Peter First, who was written about the importance of administration of peyote in the Mayan culture. And this is a sculpture that makes it very, very explicit. Then we continue to the next one. This is what was called in the Aztec culture Teonanacatl, flesh of the gods, and this was identified then by Roger Heim at the Sorbonne as Psilocybe mexicana, and some other mushrooms from the same group. You can find these kind of representations of the mushrooms in, again, ancient times, certainly centuries before Christ, in Guatemala, in Mexico. Then we have another very, very powerful psychedelic substance, which is a secretion of the parotid glands of a toad called Bufo alvarius. This is what we see here. And again, there are indications that this was already used in ancient Mayan culture. We find this both on stelas, represented on stelas, but also on ceramics. And then we have a very, very famous, very well-known Banisterium capi, which is combined with some other plants, Amazonian plants, for example, Psychonaut viridis, to create ayahuasca. There's centuries of healing tradition and also use in rites of passage. This is a great mystery in the world of psychedelics, because it's very easy to imagine that somebody who was hungry walked through the woods and found psilocybin mushroom and ate it and found out that they were psychedelic. A little more difficult to imagine that people ate a cactus, but still peyote is not such a big mystery. But here the natives had to find two plants that from modern chemistry have perfect sense, which was plants that contain tryptamine derivatives, tryptamine and 5-methoxytryptamine, and then find the Banisteriopsis that has monoamino oxidase inhibitor that protects the degradation of the amphetamines in the gastrointestinal tract. And then it requires also hours of cooking. This is what the liana looks like. So they chop this up and then cook it for many hours, and then they have to add the other specific ingredient to get the mixture of ayahuasca. Quite remarkable. Many people feel that this had to come, as in a non-ordinary state, as an information coming from another level, that this couldn't have been a result of some of practical activities of the tribe. It's a very, very beautiful picture of Anita Hoffman, Albert Hoffman's wife, holding Salvia divinatorum, another pre-Hispanic psychedelic. Then we have morning glory seeds, Ipomea violacea, or some other form of morning glory. And this is called Ololuki in pre-Hispanic cultures. And we are talking about seeds of morning glory. And it has been computed that each seed would be equivalent of about 1 microgram of LSD. This is actually another plant of which Albert Hoffman isolated the pure alkaloid. It's called LA32, and it's actually monoethylamide lysergic acid. Nobody has so far found LSD as such, which is diethylamide of lysergic acid, but an extremely close substance is already known natural psychedelic, which is this olodeuki. When Albert Hofmann isolated the monoethylamide, he got under attacks of chemists who were accusing him that he must have had some samples of LSD in his laboratory, and that he contaminated his samples, which made him very, very angry because he was very, very precise and meticulous chemist. The reason why they didn't believe it because lysergic acid comes from a fungus, which is a much, much lower level of evolution than morning glory, and so they were surprised that they found the same substance in the fungus and also in a relatively high flower. Datura is another very powerful psychoactive substance that in large dosages can be poisonous and also create delirium rather than a psychedelic substance. It's just to a great extent a matter of dosage. Datura is used in the Amazon by the shamans, but it's also a sacrament of the Shaivites in India. It grows around Shiva temples. Now, this is a very famous sculpture which is in the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City. It's called Xochipilli, or Lord of Flowers. People who were sort of looking at this, they concluded that this shows a person in an ecstatic rapture. You can see the contraction of the feet, the toes, and then also the position of the arms and the head kind of looking up. But the fascinating thing about this is that at Schultes, who was an ethnobotanist from Harvard University, found out that every single plant which is represented on this sculpture is a plant with psychedelic properties. Now, the ancient Mayans were also using some other method, which was bloodletting, massive bloodletting, which is still today performed by the Lacandon Maya Indians, with whom Christian Rech worked quite a bit. And this is a stela which is showing a king and a queen performing the exsanguination, sort of bloodletting. And he is doing it by perforating his penis, and she is doing it by perforating her tongue. And they were also sort of pulling strings through the wounded area to keep the blood flowing. This is another thing, again, king and the queen. The queen is perforating her tongue and pulling the string through it. And these are the pre-Columbian, pre-Hispanic psychedelics that, quite popular among the psychonauts. Then we get to, in the history of psychonautics, to the beginning of the golden era of psychonautics, which of course was Albert Hofmann's discovery of LSD-25. So just in a nutshell, the history is very interesting. He was specializing in ergot alkaloids, which are very important medicines. At the time, there were particularly two of them. One, ergometrine, which was used for contraction of the uterus and stopping gynecological bleeding. and the other one was used for migraine headache. This more recent one is called Sunset. So Albert was, he took the molecule of lysergic acid. The term lysergic means it's something that you get through diluting or lytic activity, dissolving ergot. Lysergic, is lysis and ergot. And he was adding different side groups to create substances which would be more effective and have less side effects. And so 1938, he synthesized LSD-25, which was the 25th in that series. He sent it to pharmacologists for testing in animals, and it came back with a report, not a particularly interesting substance, and further research should be discontinued. Now, those of us who knew Albert heard very frequently the story how he couldn't somehow get this particular substance off his mind for no particular reason, a completely irrational process where he felt that they must overlooked with something with this particular substance. And in the next 5 years, this feeling got so strong that he decided to actually synthesize another sample of LSD and send it back to the pharmacologist, and for them to do more careful examination of the properties of the substance. Now, no matter how careful this would be, they would not have discovered the psychedelic effects. For that, you need a human being. And here, accident happened, or Albert liked to call it serendipity. And he, during the synthesis of this new sample, he started feeling strange, and powerful emotions were coming. He started having optical illusions. He started seeing colors and so on. And his first idea was that he was getting crazy. And then 2.5 hours later, this subsided. And then when he gave it some thought, he felt that there must be some better explanation. And one of them would be that maybe he somehow intoxicated himself with this substance that he was synthesizing. But until his death, really didn't understand how it could have happened. He was a very careful, meticulous scientist. Obviously, you work with gloves when you synthesize new substances. You don't lick your fingers. So the only suspicion he had that it might have happened when one of his eyes was itching, and he just very gently touched it with his glove. And LSD is so powerful that maybe that was enough for a dose that would create such consciousness changes. Some people are in questioning it because he had spontaneous mystical experience as a young boy, a young man. So they felt that maybe this was just a synchronistic situation where at the time when he was synthesizing LSD, he also had another spontaneous experience, and then led to the actual testing and experiment. So after he came to this conclusion, he decided to do a controlled experiment. He took what he considered, he said, being a very conservative person, considered infinitesimal or minuscule dose of LSD, which he concluded was 250 micrograms, which is 25% of the dose that you use with the other ergot alkaloids. I don't know how many of you relate to this number, but this is a dose that later, when we worked with LSD, we considered to be at least on the edge of a high dose, when you had to prepare people, several hours before the session, explain to them what is going to be happening. Then usually have a male, female sitters for 6 hours or so, keep people overnight, and then we talk with them before they go home. So he took it very casually. It was, of course, 45 minutes later, which is about the latency period. This state came back, this time with vengeance. He couldn't continue working. He asked his assistant to take him home. And this was 1943. This was wartime, when there were some restrictions for the use of cars. So many people were bicycling. So there's a great description of Albert's ride through the streets of Basel, under the influence of 250 micrograms. Actually, in California, every year when there is the anniversary of the discovery of LSD, there is a mass bicycle ride celebrating that. Of course, many people in a similar state of consciousness that he was when the original ride happened. He came home. He felt terrible. He thought he was dying. He thought his neighbor was a witch and was hexing him. So he asked the assistant to call the doctor. But when the doctor came, he was not dying anymore. He just had relived his birth, and he was experiencing himself as a newborn in a wonderful state of mind. He had the feeling many of his problems were solved, the feeling this was the beginning of a new phase of his life. He was very, very excited. So he reported this to his boss, Dr. Stoll, and it just happened that Dr. Stoll's son was a psychiatrist in Zurich, and they asked him if he would like to conduct a pilot experiment, which he did. He gave LSD to a group of quote-unquote normal people and a group of psychiatric patients. In 1947, he published a paper that became overnight a scientific sensation. It was called LSD-25, a fantasticum from the ergot group. Now, the excitement about it was not actually the psychedelic effect, because it was already known that there are psychedelic plants, and actually at the turn of the centuries, Hefter isolated the first pure alkaloid from a psychedelic plant, which was mescaline from peyote, and we already had some other psychedelics in pure form, ibogaine, and then alkaloids from the Syrian rue, Peganum harmala, and from Banisteria capi, which were called like banisterin, yagein, telepathine, and so on. So this was not new. What was new was the power of LSD, where you need to take, let's say, 100 milligrams of peyote to have a decent session. All you have to take is like 100 micrograms of LSD, which is 1,000 times more powerful. And so the excitement was about how powerful psychoactive properties of LSD were. And it was conceivable that the human body could produce something like this. And then what we call mental diseases, psychosis, and so on, would actually be aberrations of body chemistry. So the initial experiments were called experimental psychosis, until we discovered that we were not doing psychopharmacology, because the effects were completely unpredictable. You couldn't have pharmacology if you wouldn't know specifically what effect you are looking for. So just about everything could happen with LSD, but nothing had to happen. So it was then obvious, at least to me, that we were dealing with a catalyst, that when we take LSD, we don't have an LSD experience, we have an experience of ourselves, but it's coming from the depths of the psyche that's normally not available, except in something like what we call now spiritual emergency, spontaneous opening of the psyche on a very, very deep level. So we are now in what was called the golden age of psychopharmacology, which is the discovery of LSD, and then everything that follow, all the laboratory work, all the human experiments with artists, with priests, you know, with scientists and so on. So this is now the era of, the early era of psychedelics, where it seems like LSD had so many uses in so many different areas that it was unprecedented, and was called Albert Hofmann's wonder child, until, of course, the problems came, the legislation and so on, the legal suppression of psychedelic research. But the very, very exciting years. So I would just take us quickly through a little pictorial tribute to Albert. This is a photograph of him when he discovered LSD. This was shown all over the world. Then the next picture is Albert when he visited us in Maryland. So behind him is the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, where we were conducting the experiments. In the middle is Walter Pankey, who's known for his famous Good Friday experiment, where he gave a group of students of theology psilocybin and some of them placebo, which was niacin, and showed that the experiences that the students had were could not be differentiated from what you find in the spiritual literature of the world. And the other person is Helen Bonney, who was our music therapist. So this is the next one. Is we were doing our holotropic breathwork training in Wasserfallenhof, which is near Basel, and we invited Albert to spend a day with our trainees. The person on my right is Christina. Sorry, then the next one is probably, I would say, 26, 27 years ago, one of my visits in their beautiful home, which was on the French Swiss boundary, which is called Berg. And I visited and spent some time with Albert. The next picture is showing Anita, whom you saw before as this beautiful young woman holding the bouquet of Salvia Divinatorum. And this is a picture from the garden, Hofmann Garden, where again the remaining person there is Christina. And during this visit, just synchronistically, there was a visit of two wonderful visionary artists, Martina Hoffmann and Roberto Venosa, who has been dead now about three years. They were focusing on the light, on the beautiful side of psychedelic experiences. The next one is a picture showing Hans-Rudi Giger, whom you will know as somebody who got the Academy Award for his the sets and the creatures in the movie Alien. And this is in his museum in a Swiss town called Gruyère, where the fondue cheese comes from. He bought a wing of the castle in Gruyère when he put his museum. And he let us do a training module in holotropic breathwork. And again, we invited Albert for a day. And this is Hans-Rudi now taking Albert through the gallery. We were very concerned because you know, he had such a refined aesthetic sense, and Hans-Rudi paintings are quite heavy. There's a lot of, you know, sexual material, aggression, satanic motifs, and so on. But Albert was very impressed because he also knew that the LSD can take you into difficult places from his first plant experiment. So he was quite impressed. Now this is the end of this module. At this point, Albert was 4 months from his 100th birthday. This was September. This is the module is ending, and we are just taking a photograph in front of it. On the right side is Carmen, who Hans Ruedi's wife, and on the other side is Dev Sparks, who is the director of the holotropic breathwork training. And this is now the goodbye from this module. And the next picture will take us to a situation of 2 years into the future. It's celebration of Albert's 100th birthday, which was in Basel. So I went back to Switzerland to celebrate. This was in the Museum of Natural History in Basel. You know, very, very great event where there were all the people whom we call psychedelic relics, people who are still surviving from the 60s. And the Bundes president sent a letter to Albert calling him a great scientist. So it was wonderful. Then in the evening, he took several of us to Berg, to the village, where there was now celebration of the neighbors. And this was a very different event, you know, children bringing flowers and singing songs and saying poems and so on. LSD was not mentioned once. I don't think that these people knew what he did in the world or what he did to the world. This was just a celebration of a wonderful neighbor who just happened to be 100 years old. So now, 2 years later, Albert was still on the program of what was called psychedelic forums, which were annual conferences in Basel, but he didn't feel very well. So he invited us if we want to spend the afternoon with him, which we did. So this is again Hans Ruedi Giger. And this is 4 weeks before he died at the age of 102. And this is his last photograph that we have is holding the book by Alex Gray. So we'll go now to some other chapters of psychedelic history. This is Aldous Huxley with his wife Laura. And Humphrey Osmond, the psychedelic researcher of the pioneers, together with Abe Hoffer in Saskatchewan in Canada. And the name psychedelics came from a correspondence between Aldous Huxley and Humphrey Osmond, where they were competing who can find a better name for this new substance. And Humphrey Osmond won, calling it psychedelics, mind expanding, mind opening substance. Huxley came with some strange sort of esoteric names like phanerothyme, sort of manifesting emotions and so on. But psychedelics won, and this is how we know it until this day. So now the next chapter was now discovery of psilocybin and psilocine. This is associated with Gordon Wasson, whom I already mentioned. He was a very unlikely person to play any role in the history of psychedelics. He was a New York banker, the vice president of the Morgan Trust Company. And he was married to Valentina Pavlovna, who was a Russian obstetrician. And they had like a log house or weekend house in Catskill Mountains. And one day when they were there, they were walking through the forest, and Valentina Pavlovna got excited about the mushrooms, so picked the mushrooms because she knew them and took them home. And Gordon warned them that they cannot eat it. Those are toadstools. You eat only what they give you in the supermarket. And she insisted and cooked it, and he tasted a little, and he really loved that. And when they were still alive in the morning, he realized that he was what he later called mycophobe, whereas the Eastern Europeans are mycophiles. And this was a conversion. He became an amateur mycologist. They wrote together a bibliophile, wonderful book, Russia, Mushrooms and History, the role of mushrooms in the folklore, Russian folklore. And they were looking then at the mushrooms in other countries, and they found the reports of Bernardin Sahagún, who was a priest who came with the conquistadores to Mexico and described the use of these mushrooms by the natives there. And so he and Ed Shaltis, they made several trips to Mexico looking if there's still some knowledge of these mushrooms, and they finally found Maria Sabina the curandera. So we'll go through this history. So this is now Gordon Wasson in his office with some of the mushroom effigies that he was collecting. And this was a visit that I made to his home in Connecticut. And then in the next picture, we see him and Ed Shaltis on the Mexican trip where they're looking for the mushrooms. And then they finally found this Mazatec village. This is the home of Maria Sabina of the curandera. This is Maria Sabina herself with the mushrooms. And this is how easy it was to get the psilocybin mushrooms in this Mazatec village, because it was just during the season, there was just a lot of them. So you can see Gordon picking up some good samples for himself. And now the next picture is what the mushrooms look like when I close up. And this is now beginning of what they called velada, the sacred mushroom ceremony, to which she invited Gordon and his wife Valentina Pavlovna, and there was also a photographer traveling with them. Now this is now Maria Sabina giving the mushrooms to Gordon. And here you can see what the situation looks like. This is a syncretistic religion. So they combine Christian elements with the native, indigenous elements. And this is obviously when the effect is coming on. When they came back, there was a big article in the Life magazine, and these are the pictures from that magazine. And here we have Gordon and Valentina Pavlovna putting the samples into the jars for the transportation to Europe. As I mentioned, they took it to the Sorbonne, where Roger Heim, the botanist, mycologist, identified the species, and then they passed it on to Albert Hofmann, and they developed first a mass production. They developed a way of growing them on an artificial medium, so they got insufficient amount of the mushrooms for the analysis, and then they put it through just a brilliant sequence of procedures where they finally pinned the effect down to 2 alkaloids, psilocin and psilocybin, that are still being used now. They then took the psilocybin dragees to Maria Sabina. We wanted to see if she gives her seal of approval, and she got very excited. She said, this is just like the mushrooms, and she would now be independent of the season. She would now have, supply of a sacrament. So then another important period in psychonautics then takes us to Israel. This is Raphael Mechoulam, who is like the Israeli Albert Hoffman. He's the one who isolated THC from hemp, from marijuana, and he continued studying the cannabinoids until this very day. We spent 4 weeks in Israel, traveling with Rick Doblin, who was bringing in medication with marijuana to replace the narcotics in people with PTSD, and then also bringing MDMA as a research project for studying again the effect on the veterans. And then a major period in the history of psychonautics. This is the work of Sasha Shalgin. He was a brilliant chemist and kind of a polyhistorian. He was a real Renaissance mind, and he created this whole, series of tens of new psychedelics, or many of these substances are called rather entheogens because they have somewhat different effects from the major psychedelics, mescaline, psilocybin, psilocin, and LSD. So entheogen means generating or engendering God within, the beyond within. So Sasha was producing these, and he had a team of people who were testing it, including themselves, and then giving them to people to experiment with. And of course the FDA didn't like it, so they were always trying to identify what the substance was and putting it on Schedule 1. And by that time Sasha had another one, MDA, MDMA, MMDA, STP, what will be MDA, MMDA, 2CB, and so on. He was joking that he actually could produce one which would be called FDA. So he wrote these amazing books, Tichkal and Pichkal, about the psychedelics that he produced and tested. Now, this is my visit to Sasha's laboratory. This is, believe it or not, this is the laboratory when he produced all those substances. It looks like a visit to a medieval alchemist rather than to somebody who is a modern chemist, producing enormous number of preparations of substances. So he was a very special man, loved, by thousands and thousands of people. And at this point, he's getting some justification, and turns out that MDMA might be the only thing that would help for PTSD, which is a formidable problem, from the perspective of mental health, from an economic perspective, from a political perspective. And we hope that this would be the first substance that would be really become available on the market. So this was a very brief journey through the history of psychonautics, exploring the different technologies of the sacred, as I call them, ancient, aboriginal, native, and modern. You saw the many different uses that different cultures, the ancient and pre-industrial cultures, had for them. And we are basically, when I say we, I mean the industrial civilization. We are the only group in the history of humanity that does not have any use for holotropic states, and we have even outlawed some of the means and some of the context in which people can have the experiences and have the benefit, whether it's for healing, for spiritual opening, for artistic inspiration, or just for growth, for discovering their own potential. So I hope that you are going to continue with me on this journey. It would be a long one. We have 24 modules to spend together, and I hope that we'll have a chance to really explore this very interesting territory from many different perspectives, many different points of view. So hope to see you and also hear your comments, hear your feedback and questions that would be following each two of those modules in the future. Have a great day.
Okay, that concludes our time with Stan today. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'd just like to remind you, as Stan just mentioned, that in a few weeks from now, on Tuesday, January the 3rd, we will be having, Stan will be hosting a live Q&A call. So we hope that you'll be able to join us again then, same time, same day. And please collect your questions and bring them so that you can speak directly with Stan. In the meantime, we would also like to invite you to ask your questions at any time using the Submit a Question to Stan button on the course homepage. So please go ahead and use that, and Stan will reply to as many as he can. Please be patient with him with the volume. There are a lot of people in this class, so thank you for your patience. In closing, we'd like to remind you again quickly to confirm your email address with us, to bookmark your course homepage, and to join our course community group and access all of that information on your course homepage. Once again, thank you, and on behalf of the Shift Network, have a wonderful day, and we'll be together again next week.